Greetings, Black Pill time. Why do you guys keep coming back here? Today we're talking about suicide prevention. The TLDR on this is going to be suicide prevention is about more than screening at emergency rooms because individual responsibility is bullshit. It's a scam. Forget about it. Hey, why do home printers resoundingly suck? Well, because they weren't designed to print documents. They were designed to sell proprietary toner cartridges. Stick that away for later, I guess. Some of y'all smart people have already made the connection. Stick that away for later. Next thing we need, errors. Type 1, type 2 error. I 100% of the time get these backwards, so I wrote them down, which is which. Type 1 error is your false positive. Type 2 error is your false negative. So you go in for your COVID swab, right? And the doctor shoves that Q-tip up into your brain pan, and then the next day, you know, if you're lucky, you get the message, and but you have COVID. But you don't have COVID. In fact, you're isolating for 10 days or whatever they're doing now, unnecessarily, for nothing. That would be a type 1 error, right? When the cancer screen says you have cancer and you don't have cancer. In the other case, the other result might be worse. You get your COVID test back and the result is negative, but as a matter of fact, you have COVID. So you go around like coughing on elderly people, false negative, type 2 error. Stick that away. All right, next thing we got to talk about, who attempts and who completes suicide? Well, women attempt more than men, because life as a woman in America is more depressing than life as a man. And I am a man, and I know how depressing it is to be a man in America. That's bad. So women attempt more than men, but tend to use interruptible means. That is, women are more considerate. They don't want to leave a mess. They're less impulsive. They're less likely to have guns or the pain tolerance for the kind of serious sawing work that it would take to cut deep enough to really bleed out quickly. Interruptible means. Oh, I just said men have higher pain tolerance than women. Yeah, sorry, but PMS and childbirth. Look, dude, men might be dramatic about it because we're trained like never to show weakness and to like power through and rub some dirt on it. But sometimes we can show pain with specific people and get something from that. Get care, get affection, and we don't always know how to get the care and affection that we need. And so, man, it can be a whole thing. It can be a whole thing. But anyway, we can test for who has higher pain tolerance if you're super interested in that. All you need is like a bucket of ice water and a timer. Don't let anyone keep their hand in the water for more than 5 minutes because after 5 minutes, you start risking tissue damage. And then you get dudes and chicks to put their hands in the water, not all at once. You know, ideally, they're isolated while we go through this. And see how long people leave their hands in the ice water. And women, if it's just a woman in a room and some ice water and the instructions to put her hand in and see how long she leaves it there, I mean, women defeat men at this task. Women leave their hands on average in the water substantially, statistically, significantly more than men leave their hands in the water. But, repeat the test with anything on the line, anything at all. Even someone's watching. Tell the participants it's men versus women. $5 if you can max out the 5 minutes. And then the men destroy the women. It does not seem to be that women have higher pain tolerance. It seems to be that women are more compliant and less competitive, as you'd expect in American society in its current iteration. Like the younger the people that you test, you know, if you're testing young adults, you might not get that same result anymore because culture is evolving. Okay, men don't attempt at the same rate as women. Men don't attempt suicide at the same rate as women, probably because men's lives in some ways don't suck as much. You'll see when we get to the predictors. But men complete at higher rates because we tend to use power tools. Guns? So, the highest risk group used to be elderly men. Men, incur disabilities or just lose capabilities, sore knees and bad backs and loss of lean muscle, and start to feel like a potential burden. They've lost their high status role in main society, the alpha male. But just since COVID time, I'm the riskiest category. Middle-aged men. Two things happened. On the more macabre side, COVID hit the so-called silent generation the hardest. Lots of elderly men who might previously have been candidates for suicide died instead of COVID. And then the economy went pumpkins up on us. This actually has been happening for years. Wage stagnation combined with normal inflation, political disempowerment, or for most white men, just the perception that others' equality is a reduction in status for us, which is wrong, obviously, but is still what white dudes tend to think. Chaos, bills mounting up, standards of living declining, protections against credit card abuse and so forth, abuse by the card companies, by Visa and so forth, against the population declining. And in 2020, 80% of American jobs were low-wage service jobs with no pathway into the middle class. Then COVID hit, right? People couldn't pay their rent. The masculine mystique, in a lot of ways, just caved in. It was unsupportable. And the suicide rate spiked. So middle-aged men right now, right this second, are the leading group of successful suicides. And as infectious disease takes a backseat in mortality, pretty soon I expect elder men to sort of reestablish their dominance over us and be the lead suicide risk. Suicide is usually the number 1 or 2 cause of death for teen males. That is not because they're the riskiest group. It's because young, healthy dudes just don't die of other causes, of sudden heart attacks, strokes, illnesses, and so forth, the way that older men do. So it's usually accidents and suicide are 1 and 2 in a kind of, all right, so why do people do the suicide thing? People primarily suicide to escape pain. At least here and now, America 2022, other times and places, suicide has been a respected means of political protest, for example. But this time, this place, people suicide mostly because they feel helpless and hopeless. That is, there's pain in their life that they can neither endure nor escape. That pain might be physical, it might be emotional. Brains don't really differentiate that much between those two categories as it happens. Pain is pain. The nociceptive region of the brain tells you hurt, and it doesn't matter what the input is, okay? Depression hurts. What are the risk factors? Let's go. Predictors are roughly, in no particular order, maleness. Pain tolerance. Yeah, I know, paradoxically, right? I know. Impulsivity, access to firearms, substance use, mostly in as much as it reduces pain tolerance and impulsivity, increases impulsivity. Also poverty, especially disparity. That is, it's harder to be poor in a rich country in some ways than to be poor in a poor country, because poor people in poor countries just kind of expect, this is life. Life is just like this. And when you're poor in a rich country, you have some expectation, or you went from middle class to lower class, and suddenly the poverty seems much heavier. Good. And then finally, on the risk factors, unemployment. Depression is, of course, a predictor. The problem with this as an indicator is really the popularity of the diagnosis. It used to be, to get a depression diagnosis, one would need clinically significant distress or impairment. As I've just finished noting, though, in another video, Our first clinical diagnoses don't tend to come from mental health professionals. They come from urgent cares and family practices from medical doctors not really qualified to do the necessary screening. So depression and suicide screens have become routine, and if you score over a particular threshold, the doctor gives you a free sample of meds from the med cabinet and tells you to call a therapist, which you never really actually do. This is the heart of the suicide prevention problem. Why are we screening for suicidality? Is it to prevent suicide honestly and in good faith, or is it to make money? All right. On the research side, we say your methodology generates your method. So the intention behind the practice is going to give you the way you actually conduct the practice. Because screening is happening at MD offices and MDs aren't qualified to diagnose depression, the idea that depression is a medical illness stemming from a chemical imbalance is just false. It's just false. You're talking out of your pumpkin. This idea comes from the people who sell us the pills and make $14 billion annually and growing on the sale of those pills. We really noticed the opioid crisis because it was so often lethal, but the same forces at work that gave us the opioid crisis are at work in the psychopharm arena. Psychopharmacology, drugs that change mood, have effects on cognition and mentation. So let's go back to the type 1, type 2 error thing. At doctors' offices, we're generating a huge number of false positives. I've already forgotten which one that is. People get depression diagnoses because they're having a bad day? I mean, not they're cranky, but they sprained an ankle, they broke a leg, they were in an accident. You don't go to the ER or the urgent care when everything's fine, right? Right? Or they're having a bad week, or they're having a bad month. And doctors believe the propaganda about neurochemistry and depression. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy between pharma and doctors' offices to write prescriptions for antidepressants. I'm saying it couldn't possibly be any worse if there were. Now, it is illegal to directly pay doctors to prescribe drugs. No, not for you to go in and pay your doctor after it's illegal for companies to bribe doctors to write more prescriptions for their thing. And yet it happens, okay? Boondoggle vacations and dinners out and standing appointments to do influence and prescription pads with the drug's name on it and all the stuff in, go to the doctor and all the stuff on the walls and the models that they're using and stuff has drug company names on it, okay? So are depression and suicide screens at ERs the best way to prevent suicide? And the answer to that question turns out to be, probably not. We've been aggressively screening for suicide and depression for about the last 20 years. And as you can see probably here, the rate has only increased. If aggressive individual screening were effective, then those numbers should trend down and not up, okay? Because individual responsibility is a scam. The good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King noted that America promises socialism for the wealthy and rugged individualism for the rest of us. He wasn't prophetic. The crap that we put up with today in 2022 was going on in the 60s too, all right? And there's a bit of a paradox here. We cannot count on others to do for us. We have to try to do for ourselves. The more that we think our success is up to us, the more we have that internal locus of control, the harder we try to achieve that success. At the same time, your chance of achieving social mobility through hard work is next to zero. All right? The number of Americans who earn more than their parents has been steadily declining since the 1960s. A college degree now isn't a leg up. It's a necessity, and it comes with debt. There was a shift in corporate philosophy starting right around the time Reagan was elected. Prior, corporate leaders were patriots who cared for their workers. There was a social contract between companies and labor. They imagined us all in it together and saw one of the functions of a corporation as providing a good life and stability for a community. That became the nihilistic hellscape we know now, where employees are disposable and society can just suck it. Okay? Wealth inequality has risen at record levels every year, just like climate change. If you're poor and you aren't working hard, you have zero chance of not being poor anymore. If you are poor and working hard, you have next to zero chance. The game is rigged against you. But you lose the slim chance you possess by knowing the chances. If, as a society, we care about poverty, we can't just blame the poors. If we care about crime, we can't just blame the criminals. And if we care about suicide, we just can't blame the people committing suicide. We have to change the social conditions so that effort actually matters. This is not, in fact, a meritocracy. Hard work and intelligence rarely pay off. And the few examples that would go in the comments if people watch this crap would not refute the data. Anecdotal evidence is not evidence. So suicide is like poverty. It's tied more to the social conditions than to individual internal characteristics. Depression just isn't a chemical imbalance that can be treated. It's an adaptation, usually to a shitty life. We are the dog in the cage that gets shocked periodically with no escape from the shock. We've learned helplessness. And that helplessness is real. The way we do suicide prevention now is an individual responsibility model, co-opted into a profit model. Under the guise of suicide prevention, which, nobody can argue with. Suicide prevention is good. Under that guise, companies use doctors to reduce type 2 error as much as possible. No undetected depression or suicide ideation. And that sounds great. It sounds wonderful on paper, except the more that you guard against type 2 error, the more that you make type 1 error. By never allowing someone with depression to escape without a diagnosis, you diagnose thousands of people who are not, in fact, clinically depressed. The medications prescribed are also just not effective against depression, which is a story for another time. See especially the 2010 issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association that does a meta-analysis and shows that no antidepressant beats placebo, except in the most serious, severe cases of depression, which is what we used to call depression. The whole process doesn't reduce our suicide rates. But remember the thing about printer and toner. That's not what it's designed to do. The current way we go about it is to sell drugs, not to reduce suicide. Real suicide prevention would consider how much men in particular tie their worth to their gender identity and how fragile that gender identity is. I'm looking at you, Jordan Peterson. We tend to have competitors rather than friends, pressure when we need support, derision when we share our feelings, and abuse if we choose to confide in somebody. Toxic masculinity is as good a name as any to talk about that. We feel we need to be the sole breadwinner in a time and a place where single income families just don't cut it anymore for market reasons, for economic pressure reasons that aren't to do with how hard we're working. And when we can't, When to keep going, we need our kids to help us dress or our grandkids to help pay for our care, we opt out. Women attempt more but complete less. Triage would suggest less urgency, but compassion suggests at least equal attention. I'm talking about equal rights for women, including, reproductive health care and student loan debt forgiveness, affordable child care. That stuff would just go so far. Women are often single parents. And affordable child care, affordable health care, earnings opportunities combined with better representation, in film and movies and government, all of it. All of that stuff would just help so much. Then there are subsets, right? There are subsets of people with like very high suicide rates. Trans and gay teens, for example. Trying to straighten them out does much more harm than good. When folks feel maligned and unwanted, alienated, the suicide rate rises. You know, getting Joanne Rowling to just STFU would do something for the suicide rate. Putting a stop to anti-trans political propo would ease both the suicide and murder rates. People with autism spectrum disorder, we attempt suicide at, at least double the national average, and girls with autism at 5 times the national average. That needs some attention. There's something fundamentally wrong about society when people with disability... Corporations have had it too good for too long. When people have economic and political power, when wealth inequality is low, when government follows the lead of the people, we have less recourse to self-harm. We have hope, and empowerment is the opposite of helplessness, right? Look, here's some countries and their relative suicide rates, okay? And what do those other places have in common? Our rates have been going up instead of down. Real suicide prevention would be restructuring the government and society around people, promoting democracy and equality. The way we do it now is fundamentally corrupt and ineffective, because that's what it's designed for.